never thought I'd be the kind of person to watch a break-in unfold in real time from the palm of my hand, but there I was, frozen in the checkout line at the grocery store, staring at my phone as my garage lit up on the security feed. There she was, clear as day, Karen Wilcox, HOA president and self-proclaimed guardian of suburban order, standing in the middle of my workspace like she owned the place. She wore latex gloves, not the gardening kind, the crime scene investigation kind, and in her hand, a clipboard which she used to jot down notes as she rifled through my neatly labeled drawers and lifted tools for inspection. My pulse slammed in my ears. Karen wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't home. And more importantly, she didn't know the cameras were rolling. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before, someone who thought she had every right to be exactly where she stood, but she didn't. And this time, every second of it was being recorded. That's when I realized the mistake Karen had made. She thought I was just another homeowner. She didn't know I was a security engineer. She didn't know I had installed a custom surveillance system that captured her from 3 different angles the moment she stepped foot in my garage. She didn't know every motion sensor, every camera, every alert was calibrated by someone who spent the last decade designing systems to catch people exactly like her. But before I tell you how it all came crashing down, let me rewind a little, because the truth is, Karen had been circling me like a vulture from the moment I moved into Oaka Estates 6 months ago. She introduced herself on my first day, holding a 3-ring binder the size of a college textbook. "These are the HOA bylaws," she said, her smile sharp and cheerless. "I suggest you memorize them. We run a tight ship here." That was her welcome. No cookies, no flowers, just 178 pages of regulations and a warning disguised as hospitality. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just passionate about the neighborhood. But then she started showing up, not socially, not casually, officially. She walked the streets with a clipboard in one hand and a ruler in the other, measuring the length of grass blades, snapping photos of trash bins left out too long, and peering through fences like she was scouting for crime. That's when I decided I needed to protect myself, not from criminals, but from my own HOA president. I installed cameras, doorbell, motion activated, hidden, overt, full coverage of my property, especially the garage. My garage wasn't just where I parked my car, it was my sanctuary, my workspace, my retreat. On weekends, I worked on electronics, drones, sensors, systems. I kept the place spotless, not for the HOA, but for myself. Every tool had a place, the floor shone like polished stone. It was a space of precision and order. So when the first violation notice arrived, accusing me of aesthetic disruptions because I left my garage door open while I worked on a Saturday afternoon, I knew exactly what was happening. Karen was watching. She had decided I was a problem. I responded with a calm, courteous letter citing the specific bylaw she'd misquoted. It stated that garage doors should remain closed during homeowner absence or overnight, not during active use. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A second violation arrived, this time accusing me of improper storage of non-automotive items. Again, I checked the bylaws. Nothing I did violated them. So I documented everything, photos, timestamps, angles, and requested a face-to-face meeting. That was the first time I saw Karen's mask crack. As I laid out each piece of evidence, her face reddened, her fingers clenched. "The spirit of the rules is what matters," she said sharply. I asked which neighbors had complained. "That information is confidential," she snapped. That's what I knew. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was hunting. So I doubled down. I upgraded my system. I placed a sensor by the side door, added a new camera above the garage entrance, not out of paranoia, but preparation, and it paid off. Because now, standing in the grocery store with cold sweat running down my back, I watched as Karen, clipboard in one hand, gloved fingers opening drawers, walked straight into a trap she didn't know existed. My trap, my system, my evidence. I left my cart and ran, not just to catch her, but to end this game once and for all, because Karen Wilcox had just turned an HOA dispute into something far more serious, and she had no idea every second of it was already saved, time-stamped, and waiting for the police. The garage had always been my safe space. While most people saw it as just a place to park their cars or dump their Christmas decorations, for me, it was the heart of the house. It was where I cleared my mind, tinkered with side projects, and experimented with designs I didn't have time for during the work week. I wasn't just some guy playing with tools on the weekend. I was an electrical engineer with a passion for precision. My workbench was cleaner than most kitchens. My tools hung in perfect alignment on custom pegboards, labels faced forward, wires coiled neatly, floors swept spotless. It didn't just function like a lab, it looked like one. So when I received a formal HOA violation notice accusing me of garage door abuse, I couldn't help but laugh at first. According to Karen's letter, I was violating the bylaw that required garage doors to remain closed when not in active use. Her claim was that I left mine open for excessive periods, which she said disrupted the uniformity of the neighborhood and compromised community security. What she didn't realize was that I had already read every page of the HOA bylaws she had dumped on my doorstep on day one. I knew the rule, I knew the language, and I knew that the clause specifically referred to doors being left open overnight or while the homeowner was absent. I was neither. I was home, I was working, I was actively using the garage every single time it was open. So I drafted a response, polite but firm. I referenced the exact section and the specific conditions outlined in the document she herself had given me. I made sure to timestamp it and include a copy of my garage's surveillance logs from the previous 2 Saturdays, clearly showing me present and working during daylight hours. Since she insisted on paper correspondence only, I dropped it in her mailbox and went on with my life. Or so I thought. 3 days later, a second violation appeared on my doorstep. This time the offense was more absurd. According to her, I was in breach of Section 23.4, which she claimed prohibited the visible storage of non-automotive items inside the garage. I didn't even have to open the binder to know she was bluffing. That rule, which I remembered well, specifically stated that such items must not be visible from the street when the garage door is closed. Not only was my garage door open only during use, but even then, the interior was cleaner and more organized than most people's living rooms. My workstation wasn't an eyesore, it was a showcase of craftsmanship. That's when I realized this wasn't about the garage, this wasn't about aesthetics, this was about control. Karen had zeroed in on me the moment I moved in, and now she was using the rule book as a weapon. I decided to call her bluff. I requested a meeting at her home and came prepared. I brought printed photos of my garage, taken from the sidewalk, no clutter in sight. I highlighted the relevant bylaw passages, annotated them with red ink, and even brought a copy of the binder she'd given me on day one. Her expression when I laid everything out was priceless. She shifted in her seat at the dining room table, eyes darting between her clipboard and the photos I'd spread in front of her. Her face went red, then pale, then red again. "The spirit of the rules is what matters," she snapped, trying to regain control. "Your garage doesn't appear to be used primarily for vehicle storage. That's concerning to the community." I raised an eyebrow and asked calmly, "Which members of the community exactly?" She bristled. "That information is confidential," she said, stacking her papers as if to end the conversation. I wasn't surprised. There were no concerned neighbors. This was personal. She had decided that I was a threat to her suburban kingdom, and now she was trying to manufacture violations to justify her vendetta. But I wasn't going to play by her script. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "since we seem to disagree on how to interpret the bylaws, maybe we should bring this up at the next HOA meeting and let the board weigh in." Her eye twitched. That got to her. Karen thrived in one-on-one power plays. She didn't like public scrutiny, especially not the kind that involved people asking uncomfortable questions. "That won't be necessary," she said tightly. "I'll review your documentation and get back to you." I left feeling confident that I'd called her bluff. She had nothing. I had the rule book, the footage, the photos. She had opinions and a clipboard. But I had underestimated just how far Karen was willing to go. For the next week, things were quiet, no new notices, no clipboard sightings. I let myself relax, thinking maybe she had backed off. I went back to my drone project, fully immersed in designing a lightweight aerial mapping device for a friend's agricultural business. My garage became alive again, humming with wires, schematics, and the low whir of soldering irons. Then came Saturday. I had a grocery run planned and figured I'd be gone less than an hour. As always, I locked the doors, shut down my workspace, and headed out. Everything was normal until I was 3 people deep in the checkout line and my phone buzzed. Motion detected in. Garage camera too. At first I figured it was a raccoon or maybe a strong breeze that triggered the sensor, but when I opened the app, what I saw made my blood run cold. Karen, in my garage, alone, gloved, confident. She had entered through the side door, which was supposed to be locked. She was opening drawers, lifting tools, and writing things down on that same cursed clipboard. Her posture was calm, methodical, as if this were just another Saturday inspection. But it wasn't. This wasn't her property. This wasn't some casual HOA checkup. She had broken in, and the worst part? She didn't look the least bit concerned about getting caught. She had no idea the entire garage was covered by overlapping camera angles. She had no idea every drawer she opened triggered an alert. She had no idea I was watching her live from the middle of the supermarket, standing frozen with my groceries half bagged and my adrenaline surging like a dam about to burst. In that moment, everything changed. This wasn't about neighborhood bylaws anymore. This was trespassing. This was violation of privacy. This was the moment Karen Wilcox crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And she did it all while thinking I didn't waste a second. I left my half-bagged groceries right there on the conveyor belt and bolted for the exit, ignoring the cashier calling after me. I was already dialing the non-emergency police line as I walked briskly to my car, trying to keep my voice steady while adrenaline surged through me like an electric current. There was no doubt in my mind what I was seeing. Karen Wilcox, the woman who had spent months nitpicking over the height of grass and the angle of trash bins, had broken into my garage in broad daylight. She wasn't just peeking through the windows or snapping a photo from the sidewalk. She was inside, alone, with latex gloves on and a clipboard in hand, going through my personal belongings like she had every right in the world to be there. I gave the dispatcher a clear, calm description of what I was witnessing in real time. I told them my address, explained who Karen was, and stated flatly that she had entered my property without permission, without notice, and was actively inside my garage, rifling through drawers and touching my tools. I emphasized that I had camera footage, multiple angles, and a timeline to prove it. The dispatcher advised me to stay out of the house until officers arrived and told me help was already on the way. I agreed, but I wasn't just going to sit in my car like a passive bystander. I had to see this through. I mounted my phone on the dashboard and kept the live feed up as I sped home, every red light testing my patience. The whole time I watched Karen move through my garage like she belonged there, inspecting components of the drone I had been building, flipping through notebooks of sketches and diagrams, lifting my soldering tools, even checking under the workbench as if she expected to find some sort of hidden contraband. She paused occasionally to jot something down, frowning in disapproval like she was conducting an inspection for the health department. It was so real she had no idea she was being watched. When I finally turned onto my street, I didn't pull into my driveway. I parked a few houses down and waited. Within 2 minutes, 2 police cruisers rolled in with no sirens, just quiet authority. I stepped out and flagged them down, heart pounding, as I walked them through what was happening. I showed them the footage live on my phone, rewound it to the moment she entered, and pointed out the marks on the side door from her forced entry. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. One of them, a tall, older man who looked like he'd seen it all, nodded and motioned for his partner to follow him. I stayed back as they approached my garage side door and knocked loudly. "Police! Open the door!" No response. They knocked again, this time with more force. A moment later the door creaked open, and there stood Karen Wilcox, clipboard in hand, her blonde bob as perfectly coiffed as ever, though now slightly disheveled. Her expression went from surprised to irritated in the blink of an eye. "Officers, what seems to be the problem?" she said with forced calm, straightening her spine like a school principal about to scold a student. "Do you have permission to be in this residence, ma'am?" the older officer asked. "I am conducting an official HOA inspection," she replied confidently. "As president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, I have the right to inspect properties for code violations. Do you have written documentation of that right, or a key provided by the homeowner?" he continued, his tone neutral but firm. Karen hesitated. "The bylaws grant the board authority to ensure compliance," she said, faltering slightly. "This homeowner has received multiple violations and has failed to address them properly." The younger officer glanced at me. "Sir, did you give this woman permission to enter your home or provide her with a key to this garage?" "Absolutely not," I said clearly. "I have never authorized her or anyone from the HOA to enter my property without my presence, and I have security footage showing she forced entry through that side door and has been in here for over 20 minutes going through my belongings." Karen's face began to flush, the bravado draining from her posture. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly, her voice rising in pitch. "I was documenting ongoing violations. The garage contains non-automotive items and appears to be used as a workspace, which violates community standards." "Ma'am," the officer said, "HOA rules do not override state trespassing laws. Unless you can show us something in writing that gives you the legal right to enter a private residence without permission, this is breaking and entering." Karen's hands began to tremble as she flipped through her clipboard, suddenly looking very unsure of herself. "I don't have the document with me, but I assure you, Section 42 of the bylaws permits inspections. These items needed documentation, regardless of what the HOA regulations say," the officer replied patiently. "You cannot enter someone's private property without their consent. That's the law. And right now, you're in violation of it." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her eyes darted between the officers, then to me, then to the side door. She realized too late that there was no way out of this. The gloves, the clipboard, the lock tampering, it was all on camera. She turned to me with a desperate look as if hoping I'd somehow validate her story. But I just stood there, stone-faced, letting the footage on my phone speak for itself. The officer turned to her again. "Ma'am, at this time I need to advise you of your rights." As he began reading the Miranda warning, Karen looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. Her knees didn't buckle, but her eyes filled with disbelief. She tried to interrupt, claiming she had no intention of stealing anything, that she was just trying to uphold the community's standards. "Then why the gloves, Karen?" I asked quietly. "Why sneak in when you knew I wasn't home?" She didn't answer. Instead, she was escorted outside by the officers, her hands still trembling, the clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. By now, neighbors had begun to emerge from their homes, drawn by the quiet police presence and the unmistakable tension. I saw blinds twitch, doors open, phones raised. Karen tried to hold her head high, but the composure was gone. Her voice quivered as she insisted, loudly enough for the growing crowd to hear, "This is all a misunderstanding. I was doing my duty as HOA president. The community depends on me." But no one said a word. Not a single neighbor came to her defense. She was guided into the back of the cruiser, the door closing behind her with a final metallic thunk. The same woman who had once walked the neighborhood like a queen now sat in the back of a police car, her authority stripped, her excuses crumbling under the weight of cold, hard evidence. I gave my full statement to the officers, provided them with digital copies of the footage, timestamps, everything. They thanked me for my cooperation and informed me that she would likely be charged with breaking and entering, trespassing, and possibly attempted burglary, depending on what the footage revealed about her intent. As they drove away with Karen in the back seat, I looked around at the crowd of neighbors still lingering on their porches and sidewalks. No one cheered, no one clapped, but the silence spoke volumes. The reign of Karen Wilcox had just come to an end, and she never even saw it coming. Back inside my house, I sat down with the officers to review the footage again, this time on a larger screen in my living room. The senior officer took notes while the younger one watched in silence, his expression a mixture of disbelief and amusement. I played the footage from the moment Karen appeared on the edge of the frame, walking briskly toward my side yard, glancing over her shoulder like a character in a bad heist movie. She approached the side door of the garage with a small leather case in hand and crouched beside the lock. I zoomed in. You could clearly see the metal tools she used to manipulate the mechanism. She was no expert, but she was determined. It took her about 3 minutes to get it open. The officers exchanged glances again. "That, right there, is attempted unlawful entry," the senior one said quietly. Then the video showed her slipping inside, adjusting her gloves, and immediately beginning to search. She opened drawers, she lifted lids, she took close-up photos of circuit boards and wires and labels. At one point she found a bag of spare drone propellers and looked confused, like she had stumbled onto evidence of alien technology. She examined them for a long moment, then wrote something on her clipboard. The younger officer chuckled under his breath. You would think she was trying to solve a murder. Then we watched as she moved over to my workbench, flipping pages in my project notebook, rearranging small bins of screws and fuses, touching everything with the same strange, methodical disapproval. She didn't just violate my privacy, she dissected it, as if she were trying to find something incriminating hidden in the placement of a wrench or the type of tape I used. The footage ran for 28 minutes. She never realized she was being recorded from 3 separate cameras, never looked up, never paused with suspicion. I had designed the system to be invisible. It worked. After reviewing the damage to the lock and collecting my statement, the officers thanked me for my cooperation and informed me that Karen would be taken in for booking. They explained that the charges would likely include misdemeanor trespassing and breaking and entering, but depending on how the footage was interpreted and what a judge thought of her intent, she could also face a felony burglary charge. I had to admit, part of me didn't think it would go that far. This was the woman who used to threaten citations over lawn decorations. Now, she was being processed like a criminal. But then again, she had brought this on herself. She had stepped way over the line and walked right into a trap of her own making. I spent the rest of the evening compiling every bit of evidence I had, video files, time-stamped alerts, before and after photos of the drawers she had disturbed, screenshots of her movements. I burned everything onto a flash drive and delivered it to the police station the next morning as requested. Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation. Karen's arrest had shaken the entire HOA like a thunderclap. Some neighbors called it justice, others called it a misunderstanding. A few seemed genuinely shocked that someone like Karen, who had ruled with such ironclad control, could fall so fast and so hard. I kept a low profile, refusing to answer the random knocks on my door or the awkward questions shouted from across the street. I wasn't interested in becoming the center of a neighborhood drama, I just wanted my peace back. But peace was not on the menu yet. 2 days later I received a letter from the HOA board, not from Karen, but from the vice president, a soft-spoken man named Greg I had barely interacted with. The letter acknowledged that there had been a serious incident involving a member of the HOA leadership and that an emergency meeting would be held to address the situation. It didn't mention Karen by name, but everyone knew the meeting was scheduled for the following week, and the tone of the letter made it clear that something major was about to change. In the meantime, Karen was released on bail. I saw her once, walking from her car to her front door, head down, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. She didn't look at me, didn't wave, didn't shout an excuse or an accusation. For the first time since I'd moved in, Karen Wilcox had nothing to say. That should have been satisfying, but it wasn't. I felt an odd mix of vindication and unease. This was a woman who had built her entire identity around control. Now that it was slipping through her fingers, I didn't know what she was capable of, so I stayed alert. I adjusted the security settings on my system. I added another lock to the side door. I didn't take any chances. The night of the HOA meeting arrived, and I showed up 15 minutes early. The community clubhouse was packed more than I had ever seen for any previous event. People lined the walls, murmuring, clutching printouts of bylaws and past violation notices, some clearly hoping for a spectacle. Karen was already there, but not in her usual position at the front of the room. She sat off to the side, stiff and pale, her eyes scanning the room, but never resting on anyone for long. She looked like a dethroned monarch watching someone else try on the crown. Greg, the vice president, called the meeting to order. His voice was calm, but he wasted no time. "We're here tonight to address a serious breach of trust within the leadership of our homeowners association." He didn't say her name, but all eyes were on Karen. "After consulting legal counsel and reviewing the evidence, the board has voted unanimously to remove the current president from her position, effective immediately." A wave of whispers swept through the room, some shocked, others smug. Karen said nothing. She sat motionless, hands folded in her lap. Greg continued, "Furthermore, due to the ongoing criminal investigation, the board has chosen to suspend all unilateral inspection authority pending review. From now on, all property inspections must be conducted by a minimum of 2 board members with prior written notice to the homeowner." That announcement got a small ripple of applause. The meeting continued with mundane agenda items, but no one was really listening. All attention remained fixed on the woman who had ruled their lives for years with citations and veiled threats. As the meeting came to a close, Karen finally stood up. She didn't go to the podium. She didn't raise her voice. She just turned to face the crowd and said, in a tone that was half fury and half heartbreak, "I did everything I could to maintain this community. I protected our property values. I enforced standards. I cared when no one else did. You people don't understand what it takes to lead, and now you're throwing it all away." Her eyes locked on mine, and for a split second, I saw something unexpected. Not just rage, but a deep, wounded pride. "I hope you're satisfied," she whispered. "You've destroyed everything I built." Then she turned, collected her designer purse, and walked out of the room. No one followed her, no one called out. And when the door closed behind her, it felt like the neighborhood finally exhaled. That night, as I sat back in my garage, the same space where it had all started, I realized how much things had shifted. The woman who once believed she was untouchable had learned that rules cut both ways. The very structure she had used to control others had become the thing that unraveled her, and all it took was a camera, a little patience, and the quiet certainty that when people cross the line, the truth always finds a way to surface. 2 weeks after the emergency HOA meeting, the fallout from Karen's dramatic downfall was still rippling through the neighborhood like aftershocks from a silent earthquake. The woman who had once dictated everything, from mailbox paint colors to flower bed arrangements, was now a pariah, stripped of her title, her authority, and her carefully cultivated image. Her criminal charges, which had started with breaking and entering and trespassing, were ultimately reduced through a plea deal. She avoided jail time, but the consequences were still brutal. She was slapped with a hefty fine, ordered to complete over 100 hours of community service, and issued a restraining order barring her from coming within 100 feet of my property. That last detail seemed to sting the most. Karen had spent years walking these sidewalks like a queen, overseeing her kingdom, and now she couldn't even step near one of the homes she once scrutinized with her clipboard and ruler. But the final blow came at the next official HOA board meeting, when the community voted on her permanent removal from the board and elected a new president, a kind, reasonable woman named Denise, who actually believed in communication over confrontation. Karen didn't sit at the front of the room that time. She stood in the back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her mouth a thin line as the votes were counted and the result made official. She didn't speak until the very end, when the room had gone quiet. She took one slow step forward and said, with forced composure, "This community will fall apart without structure, without leadership. You're all going to regret this." No one responded. No one clapped. The silence was louder than any argument could have been. Karen looked around as if searching for one last shred of loyalty, but there was none. Her eyes settled on me for a heartbeat, and there it was again, that flicker of something almost human beneath the hardened surface. Then she turned on her heel and walked out, her heels clicking like a metronome in the heavy quiet. I watched her go, not with triumph, but with the strange, weighty satisfaction of justice delivered at last. The camera footage, that she never knew existed, had been her undoing, and in the end, her obsession with control had cost her everything, and maybe that was the most ironic twist of all. The woman who claimed to protect the neighborhood had become its biggest threat, and the only thing that finally stopped her was the one rule she never thought would apply to her.